Owen, are you with us? I know you are because we're just having a chat. Just click your webcam. There he is.
There we go.
Excellent. Hi, thanks for joining us tonight. Really great. Loved your photography for a while now, and it was great for you to actually say yes. So brilliant. We were chatting before you went live. Owen, before we kind of get into the presentation and looking at the 8 images, I know you got some behind the scenes shots as well for us during the session. Tell us a little bit about you. Can you? What's your background? How long have you been in photography? Where did it all start?
Well, so where did it all start? So I think like a lot of people, I had a camera as a sort of casual thing years and years and years ago when people had cameras for casual purposes. But I wouldn't have called myself a photographer. You know, it's like people have a phone these days. But I used to go to the races quite a lot. At Alton Park. I lived down the road from Alton Park with my mate Phil, and he used to take pictures of the cars. And I was a bit of a spare part, really, because you couldn't talk to him because he was busy. Long lens, like that. So I bought a camera and joined in. And but after a while, there was only so many sort of pictures of 911s coming out of Lodge Corner that you could really want in your portfolio. So I started taking pictures of the people in the paddock. Also started doing a bit of landscape photography. Got a flash, I think it was for Christmas. I think my wife bought me a flash once for Christmas, an SB 900. And I used that for a bit and then decided I needed a book. And I searched Amazon for books on flash. And the one that stood out was Joe McNally's The Hot Shoe Diaries.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember the Red Shoe Diaries on Channel 5 or something like that. Yeah. There's about the only thing on after the pubs closed back then. And I thought that was quite a clever title, but the thing that really did it for me was this sort of, I don't know, he's either a Fijian or Samoan sort of warrior on a beach holding a torch, but he was lit by a flash. You know, you were meant to think he was lit by the torch, but he was lit by a flash. And that just fascinated me, that, you know, that was a whole world of just creative lighting, you know. With small flashes, and I spent an inordinate amount of money on more flash guns, and set out trying to sort of recreate some of the things that Joe had done, and it sort of grew from there, I guess. And so, yeah, I've been shooting mainly creative photography with models and other subjects, paying clients, that kind of thing, ever since. Probably been doing this about 12 years, I think now. Yeah, okay. At least 12 years, yeah.
Is it a business for you, or is it a hobby for you, or how does it mix?
Half and half. So there's a lot of personal projects, but we then make workshops and other activities out of those. So last year I did a lot of location workshops at a location near Leek called Basfordhurst Cottage. And we ran that probably about at least half a dozen times, and did a few one-to-ones there as well. In fact, I did another one-to-one last Sunday at Basford, which is always fun to do. And that's all about the frightening 15 minutes when you arrive at a location and try to assess it and figure out where you're going to shoot, where the shots are going to be, what the angles are going to be, how you're going to light it, where the model's going to be, what's the mood, you know, how you're going to dress the set, how you're going to get rid of that radiator, you know, all those kind of good things. So yeah, we make workshops out of those. We've got a lot of stuff in the pipeline. I'm going to say me, it's an organization called Collective Vision, and it's me and a couple of models who have put together, just born out of a realization that the more people that you have contributing to your vision, that the more rounded and sort of diverse it's going to be, right? You know, I mean, I've learned over the years is that you've got to pay attention to everybody that's on the set. You know, they've all got ideas, and that's why I love doing the workshops and the tutorials. Is that I always learn things as well. You know, there's always people who've got a fresh perspective on stuff that I've seen countless times. So, so yeah, we do. I do commercial photography jobs for people from time to time as well. Shoot a lot of stuff for Barclays Bank, commercial headshots, that kind of thing. Content creation for hiring, that kind of thing. Yeah, it's a little bit varied, but it's not my I don't need to rely on it as an income at the moment. So
So one of the questions we had through anyway was obviously about how you got going in Hollywood kind of lighting. So let's kick straight off on that anyway. I know we kind of introduced the speed light from the likes of Joe McNally. When was the introduction for you in the likes of Hollywood, and how did that all kind of come about?
I think I just really like the look. I think really, and like so many sort of personal projects that I've engaged on, it's really been about you see something, you know, either whether it's online or in print or somewhere else, and it's kind of like the only way that I can kind of exercise that is to do it, you know, and I can't really get rid of it out of my brain until I've actually recreated it. So then I know that I've understood it, and then I can riff off that and do something different with it. But first of all, you know, you just see these fantastic photographs of the time, you know, the 30s and 40s in old Hollywood, and it's just like
You don't have to work in a cooking location anymore with the wax kind of foundation begin to fall off the models or the actors' faces nowadays. We can work under a cold light of LED or speed
yes,
light, studio
yeah,
flashes, and so on, isn't it? Really, so it's a whole different kind of scenario. And Anne's already said on the here that was a very fast list of what to do arriving on a location. Any hope of a slower version, please? Well done, Anne. I thought you went a bit fast. Talk about arriving on location, then. Anyway.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. So this is one of the things that we like to teach on the location lighting. We call it location lighting, but it's all about really what do you do when you shoot. And we're talking about an indoor location, really, not sort of a rock somewhere. But so you get to a house like that, like Basford, and you know, you look around and you see features. You know, it's got some big old fireplaces, spiral staircase, big old beds, kitchen, outhouses, that kind of thing. And you're thinking, um, you've got to try and match it up, I suppose. Or what I'm trying to do is match it up with different styles. And that house always speaks to me of quite a classic sort of French boudoir type of environment, and so that's what we gravitate towards. Certainly during the winter when it's too cold to use the outhouses and the grounds. So last Sunday, for example, that's what we did. They've got we're looking for things like where is the space. So where can you get distance from your subject and distance between your lights and your subject, which I think, you know, always for me, that sort of imbues the pictures with a bit more of a luxury feel, a bit more of a higher production value if you've got space, that you're not on top of the model with the camera, you know. So we're looking for angles like that where we can get distance. Looking for the setting, obviously, you know, what's going to be in the picture. In terms of you know, objects and walls and things like that, things we don't want in the picture, and are they portable? So you know, we can remove things that aren't locked down, but you know, if there's things like radiators and light switches and all that kind of stuff, how easy are they to take out in post, or do we need to do something with them on set? And that's something else that I do sort of go into at some length, really, is that there's a difference in time passes slower in post-production, right? You've got all the time in the world later to sort things out. So if it's going to be an absolute ball ache to do something on set, which would be easy for you to Photoshop out, do it later, right? Do it in Photoshop. Yeah. But conversely, if it's going to be an absolute pain to recreate in Photoshop, do it on set, you know. And for me, the one thing which is would be really silly to try and recreate in Photoshop is the light, right? You know, the direction. Yes, you can make things brighter and darker, but what you can't do is create the direction of the lights, the shadows, and whatnot. Well, I mean, you could, but it would just, you know, you're drawing at that point. You may as well just get a paintbrush out and start painting. So for me, it's I'm always going to be trying to create the light to the best of my ability on location or on set. And then, but simple things like cloning out light switches and stuff like that, we're not going to bother about. Similarly, I don't really sweat it if things like stands and lights are in the scene. If I can get the angle and the the composition that I want, and that there's at least some empty space around the subject that I can use to sort of just select stuff and get rid of it. It's so easy these days in Photoshop. You've got content aware fill, generative fill, the remove tool, all of those good things. So that sort of small stuff we don't sweat.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about it more as we go through. Shall I give you the screen? I'll make you the presenter. You should have a little thing that's popped up, and you should be able to actually show my screen. There we go. You can see the collective vision screen.
Where's it gone? Where has it gone?
Just while Owen's looking for that, guys, get the questions in as soon as you want. We'll kind of follow it all through during the sessions. I've already got loads in anyway, but that shouldn't stop you from asking the questions live and things, really. So yeah. So where are we beginning? I kind of give 8 images, as it were, because it obviously can go on for hours. So we try and keep it to kind of a time. What are we looking at tonight? Are we looking at something from beginning to end, or are we looking at 8 different images, styles, or explain about what we're going to see tonight?
I think you're going to see a lot of the images are very, very similar style, the portraits, right? So I'm not going to repeat the story for each one because they're pretty much the same. What we will talk about is how it translates into maybe a full figure image and a 3/4 image. Into some slightly different scenarios using the same sort of light. But we'll start off with a sort of reference image, if you like, which is the sort of, a portrait, a headshot. But I'm going to kick off just with a little bit of, what do we mean when we say Hollywood glamour image? Right, okay, let's see if I can make this bigger. Oh, good. All kinds of things going off here.
They can see it anyway.
I think we can see it, can't we? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you can get it bigger there. There you go.
Oh. There we are, that'll do. Right, so Hollywood lighting. So around the sort of 30s, 40s, that kind of thing. Here's some examples here. Now I can't remember who all these people are, if I'm honest. But these are all from the era. So there was George Harrell, and he got hired to produce some pictures, and off the back of that, it was the production manager at MGM, Irving Thalberg, something like that. Anyway, hired him as the stills portrait producer. There were other people around the same time who sort of copied his style. So Laszlo Willinger and Bert Six are 2 that come to mind, but it was George Harrell who really popularized this stuff. If you want to find out more about George Harrell, by the way, Sharon Stone made a very good documentary about him a few years ago while he was still alive, interviewed him and shot with him. And that's a fascinating thing. You can find that on YouTube. So hallmarks of these pictures, they used a hard light. So they were using sort of Fresnel focused spotlights, that were available on the movie sets, really. The key light is very often quite high. So, high above the portrait, above the subject. In this example, not really. You can see just by the length of the nose shadow there that she's looking up pretty much into the light, and we can see the catch light in the eyes. In fact, the light sometimes is so high you don't get a catch light, and you need to provide that with another little light just for that purpose, or put it in your post. Varying amounts of fill light. This one, not very much. But on a lot of them, you've got not very deep shadows. You've got quite a light and airy sort of feel. Eyelash shadows from the eyelashes, obviously. But that's a thing. And I've had pictures like this criticized by competition judges in the past for having eyelash shadows. But it is very much a hallmark of this era. Blown out hair light as well. I mean, this one's not too bad, but they did crank up the lights on the back. I must admit, I try to control that a little bit more for modern audiences. Again, judges don't tend to like that kind of thing if you enter competitions. And I like to have a bit more control of my image in post as well. variable light on the background. So, you know, it's usually got some sort of variation in it. It's not just a, you know, a straight gray or a white or a black. It's usually got some sort of gradient or pattern to it. And most of them are around 3, maybe 4 lights, but 3 is typical. You've got two edge lights, key light, and usually either a reflector board underneath, something like that, but there may be a 4th light to do a bit of fill. What can you do this with? Now, you can get close with a studio monoblock strobe, you know, a normal sort of studio head with a sort of 7-inch reflector and a grid. But it's really all about the size of the source for this. This one was done with a reflector and a grid, and we can see by the nose shadow it's not super crisp, but it's not soft either, right? We wouldn't call it soft light. It's still quite defined in terms of a shadow, and you can get quite a nice degree of control over this. Post-production, one of the things, you know, as you mentioned earlier, the levels of makeup that they used back in the day, we don't need to do that anymore because we can create these things in post. But it's also important to realize that there was quite a bit of post-production went on back in the day, you know, with assistants would be scrubbing the negatives to get the skin smooth and things like that. It's not by any stretch of the imagination a new thing. In fact, all of those tools on the toolbar in Photoshop, for the most part, the icons that represent the tools are representations of the actual tools that they would have used in the darkroom, you know, for the dodging and burning lollipops and masks and things like that. So we tend to go for a very smooth skin. I tend to produce these in color and then do the black and white conversion at the end, because then I've got the flexibility of having both. And they do work really well in color. You know, if you can get this right, that's one thing we can do these days. Obviously, they weren't doing in the 30s and 40s. But if you want the sort of quintessential Hollywood glamour classic look, then they're in black and white with maybe a slight warm tint just to warm them up a little bit. And this is the sort of reference image that I'm talking about. Right, that's the end of that. Okay. Oh, there were more slides. Oh, there we go. Right. So, yes, equipment. Right. So this, if I can get away with it, I'll try and use the same equipment that they used back in the day, which is Fresnel focused light. Now, you can get these quite cheaply. They're about £100 each for an incandescent one, and they produce an absolutely gorgeous light. And I still use them today, but there are some downsides. They get really hot, right? They're not called hot lights for nothing. They consume quite a bit of electricity. You know, the ones I've got are 650 watt. But the advantage is that you can see it in real time, unlike flash. And because this style does require quite precise placement of the light a lot of the time, it's a lot quicker to do it with a continuous light. I found that with a lot of flash heads that you're getting a completely different light in terms of quality off the modeling light than you are from the flash tube. The flash tube's bigger than the modeling light most of the time and isn't going to produce what you're seeing with your naked eye. So I'll try and use these things if I can. I do now have an LED one, which I use as the key light, because as Mark said earlier, these would melt the makeup off the model, and it's quite uncomfortable. Unless it's really cold, of course, in which the model likes to be heated by one of these things. But I have an LED equivalent, which we use, which also allows me to use things like scatter gels and things like that in front of them without, they'd catch fire if I put them in front of these things. Which is also a good point. These are a fire hazard, so I always travel with a fire extinguisher when we're using these things. Don't leave them alone if you do use them when they're on. Just don't leave them unattended till they've cooled down. But they are, apart from that, if you can put up with the downsides, they're really nice to work with. You can see the light and you can adjust it in real time. All right, you're missing some slides somehow. There we go. Speed lights. All right, so you can do this with speed lights. These are a really good fit, actually, in terms of the quality of the light. And I'm going to show you in a second the equivalent of how we create that same look with a speed light. It's all to do with light control and the size of the source. So the size of a typical speed light is roughly the same as one of those incandescent spots. So you get a similar sort of quality of light coming out of it, but you need to be able to control it in the same way. And you need to be able to control it without making the light source bigger. And that's always a problem with using silver reflector dishes, because the light source becomes the size of the reflector dish, which fundamentally alters the quality of light that's coming out of it. So with that in mind, let's go and get some pictures here. So if I can't use the incandescent spotlights, I'll try and use these AD200. So the reasons why I wouldn't use the incandescent spotlights is I haven't got any power, right? So, you know, we're working on location, or, you know, there just aren't any power sockets, or there's just too much ambient light, right? And I can't compete with the ambient light with those lights. I mean, 650 watts sounds like a lot, but photographically, yeah, not really. So, and these are a lot more portable, of course. So, can you see that one?
Yep.
Okay, so that's what they look like, and you can see the size. Can you see my cursor, by the way, the arrow?
Yes, I can. Yep.
So I can point to that. Right, so you can see the size of the source there. It's about the same. It's a good size, you know. So an AD200 is basically a speed light on steroids. They've got 200 joules in them rather than about 70 odd. So they're a good choice. And you know, I'm sure if you buy one, you can write your labels the right way up. All right, there's the arrow. But the problem that we've got is, of course, the light will go everywhere off this, so we need some way of controlling it. Now, you can buy from Godox, who make these lights, this barn door set. I think it's BD07 is the code for it. But the problem with them is that the barn door is roughly the same size as the light source, and so they're way too small. You do get a sort of gradient off that, but you can't really control it in any definite sort of way with these barn doors. But luckily for us, Godox made these out of steel, and we can attach bits of cardboard to them. So bits of black card with little magnets. So you can buy these magnets off eBay, and you can just clip these things on. And now your barn doors are much bigger than the source, and you can get a similar quality of light and light control than we get out of a Fresnel spot, which is quite nice. And the other advantage of doing this is that we can move these bits of cardboard about. So if we decide we want more of a sort of a gradient of light on one side, we can move it back, because the closer you get anything, any object, to a light source, the softer its shadow is going to be, because the light source is getting bigger in comparison to the thing that's casting the shadow. So this edge here is what's casting the shadow, and as it gets nearer to the light source, it's going to start to blur out. Whereas this one is further away, and you're going to get a more definite edge off that. It's still not going to be razor sharp, but you don't really want that. You know, it needs to be a little bit gradated. So I quite like this solution. You know, you can move these things around, move them up and down, or even rip bits off if you want. If you want to, you know, a peculiar size of light shaper, they're disposable after all. They're just bits of card. If you can't attach barn doors, though, you can just make a snoot out of the same black card, and you can get commercial solutions for this. Of course, you've got things like the flash bender, I think is what I've used in the past. And obviously you can get metal snoots and things like that go on there. But I don't just use this because I'm tight. I mean, I don't like to spend tons of money on something if you know, it doesn't really offer any advantage over a DIY one. But the real advantage of doing this is that you can move it backwards and forwards, right? So if I want a smaller pool of light, I could just extend the tube, just pull it out from here. And I'll get a smaller pool of light with a more defined edge. That's which you may not want, right? Which that's the downside. And if I want just a little bit of control, I can use a short one. So I've got a little short one that I can put on as well. And I can just move these things back and forth to control the pool of light on the model or on the background or whatever it is we're doing. And again, if you want, you can rip bits off this if you want to sort of produce particular shapes of light with that. And obviously there's loads of other things you could do to project patterns and things like that. I do quite often use a projection attachment to project things like a window shape or a Venetian blinds and that kind of thing, or just a simple slash of light. But we can do that quite easily with the barn doors as well. Right, let's see if I can get rid of that. There we go.
So they asked what was the make of those again? Sorry, the lights.
So these lights are made by Godox, or Godox, I think they like you to call them now. So the story goes, the company in China was called Sacred Cow, but when they tried to trademark that in the US, it was already taken. So they got the thesaurus out and looked up Sacred Cow and came up with Godox.
As you do.
As you do, yes. But they're also available under other brands. So in the UK, you can buy these from Lencata. And in fact, if you go to the Godox store in the UK, you're actually dealing with Lencata. Pixapro also badge these things as the City 200, I think it is. And then in the US, you've got Adorama do Flashpoint. So they brand them as Flashpoint. They're all the same. They're all interchangeable. They all work together. So if you buy the trigger from Adorama and the light from Godox, it will work together.
Sure. And what kind of cost per unit are these?
These are, I checked the other day, these are about £280. It's a later version. These are the original AD200s, the ones I've got. That you're now looking at the AD200 Pro, which is about £280.
And do they do a continuous light version of this one, or is it just strobe?
Oh, that's a very good question, actually, Mark, because there are tons of attachments for these things. So, in fact, if I could only have one type of light, I'd probably pick this. So, yes, in fact, I've got a little LED attachment that you can put on the front instead of. So this bit comes off, and it comes in the kit. You also get a curly bulb, which is like a bear bulb. I didn't take any pictures of that because it's not really anything I use for this sort of style, but
okay.
That is useful for filling the softbox because the light radiates out in all directions.
Makes it rounder. Okay, cool. Who was the name of the person who made the George film again?
Sharon Stone.
Sharon, oh, the actress.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, I'll look that up. What was the name of your continuous light that you mentioned in the beginning? Not the big Ollie, was it?
So I have a number of continuous lights. So I've got some knockoffs of what are effectively ARRI 650s.
Yep.
So you can find those on eBay as well if you want to buy a real ARRI 650. They're not massive amounts of money, but the ones I've got are knockoffs. I bought them and thought, if this works, I'll go out and buy some proper ones. But essentially, it's just a bulb holder. So
yeah,
there really isn't a lot to lose by buying them. And they're quite robust. I beat one back into shape the other day after it fell over, and it survived.
There's a really cheap way to go for it using halogen, isn't there? Is if they went for like a redhead equivalent, you can buy some really cheap versions of that. You can buy 3-headed kit for 110 quid, 120 quid without any trouble. LED's a lot more expensive, obviously, but the halogens, if you're working in a cold environment and you can plug them in, they'll cook you and the model. Yeah, kind of thing like that,
They're absolutely very useful. So mine are incandescents. They are tungsten, as you say. They're hot lights. Yep. But the important thing, really for me, is they've got this Fresnel focusing lens on the front, which allows you, so there's a knob on the back of this which moves the bulb back and forth, and what that allows you to do is to zoom the light in and out, so you can make the spread of light wider or narrower, but it also has a side effect on the hardness of the light. So when the light is on full flood, the bulb is at the front here, and the light source is the size of the bulb. But when you zoom the light in, the bulb retracts in the casing and it fills the entirety of this glass lens, and that then becomes the size of the light source. Now, you wouldn't think that would make much difference, but it really does soften the edges of the light quite a bit. So you can fine tune your shadows using that knob on the back, which is really handy.
Very good. I promise you guys, as soon as we get some information on workshops from Owen later on in the month or year, I'll post them on the Facebook group and include them on the newsletter. There's quite a few of you asking about that already, which is a nice sign for you. Annie can absolutely not get lighting right, so any help would be very gratefully received. So we'll get into some images in a minute, and then we'll kind of look through them more, Annie, I promise you. A couple of questions that we had beforehand were, can we shoot Hollywood in small spaces?
Absolutely. Right. So this is my business partner, Joe, who's way too good looking, really. In my tiny little studio, so this studio is on the top of my house. And it's basically what was a small bedroom, I guess. So it's not very big at all. I would say it's probably about 3 by 4 meters, something like that. And the ceiling is sort of just a regular height. But what we're looking at here is nearly 2 kilowatts of lighting power, but you can see it's still dark. And that is because we've got the barn doors on these lights closed down. Way down, so you've just got little slivers of light, so it's just lighting the thing we want it to light without throwing light around the room. Just to sort of help myself out a bit, I've painted the back of the studio in a sort of a dark grey colour. I think it's something like Dulux something Storm 2 or something. It was a paint code I got off Damien Lovegrove. And you can't get it from Dulux anymore, but B&Q will mix it for you. But any dark grey will be fine. And I've got a black floor as well, just to stop sort of wash up from the floor. But yes, you can absolutely do this in a small space. You don't need a black background or a dark background. For these sort of Hollywood lights, it's useful to have some sort of screen behind. But I have also done this on a white sweep in a bigger studio. You just need to make sure that you're far enough away from it. And obviously you put less light on it if you want it to stay grey or black in the shadows. But there you go. I think we've got, there's another angle. So while we're here, we may as well just to talk through these lights here. So we've got the key light here, which is just coming down there, just lighting the side of Joe's face. And typically I would have the model sort of have their face biased towards that light, but they don't need to be looking straight at it. In fact, I'd recommend they don't, because that's one of the other disadvantages of continuous lights, is that, you know, they're on all the time and they will blind you if you stare into them and cause you to squint and your eyes to water and that kind of thing. At the back, we've got 2 edge or hair lights, just aimed squarely at the top of our model. And I will rotate these barn doors so that I can get just the bits that I want picked out. So if I don't want, you know, a particular bit of clothing or something like that, particularly lit, I can go and rotate these. In my studio, I have the camera hooked up to a live view. I used to use Control My Nikon, but that seems to have gone west. So we use Lightroom now, just with a monitor, so that I can pootle around in the back of the studio and I can adjust the lights and see the effect in real time on the screen from the camera's point of view, which is really useful. Now, I can't do that all the time, right? It's not essential, but it, you know, if you can do that, obviously it's a big bonus. This flash gun here is providing the background in this shot. We're actually mixing in a bit of flash, and I've on the flash gun, I've got the light blaster here, which is like a tiny projection attachment. You put a speed light in the back and a Canon lens on the front and a gobo in the middle, and we were projecting, I don't know what it was, a window pattern or something like that onto the back wall. So yeah, you can mix in flash. Sometimes I put a blue gel on that as well. not because I want a blue background, but it just means that I've got my background on a different color channel, and in Lightroom I can dial it up and down on the slider. So if you know you're not going to do color and you're just going to work in black and white, you can color code your lights, and therefore you've got them on different channels later, and you can choose your exposure from each light within reason. Now, there is an extra light here, and that's because we're using such tied down lights, including on the key light. We've just got this little sliver of light. You can see there's not a lot of light hitting my reflection fill board. So we've added another light here just to do that. So this is effectively, I could have put a softbox there, right? That would do the same job. And with the light in it to power it. What this is also doing, when the light is really high up and we're not getting a catch light, we get a little catch light off this as well by angling it slightly towards the model like I'm doing here. So we get something reflecting in the eyes. It's not coming from the key light, it's in the wrong place, but most people don't notice that. So that's the small studio. Let's just cycle through these. Right, so this is the LED equivalent. Just ignore this scatter gel on the front. That's for producing these nice dappled light effects. But we don't use that for these Hollywood pictures. It's exactly the same. It has a Fresnel on the front. There it is. The only difference is that it's powered by an LED. And in fact, there are two LED lamps in this one. It's a bicolor one, and you can vary the color temperature from something like 2,700 up to about 6.5, I think, something like that. So if you want it to match daylight, it will, or if you want it to match the other tungsten lights in the scene, it'll do that as well. So these are quite useful. There's no particular reason why I bought this one, other than that it's quite cheap by comparison to some of its competitors. If you want to buy a light like this from somebody like Lupolux, it will be about £1,200 to £1,500, which is quite a lot of money. Whereas these, this is a, who makes these things? Let's have a look. This is a, there we go, Falcon Eyes. This is a Falcon Eyes 1600 TDX. Now they claim that it's 1600 because it's about the same output as a 1600 watt incandescent, but it isn't. My light meter says no. It's about the same as a 600 watt tungsten, which is reasonable. But these are about £400 to £500, something like that. So they're a lot more reasonable. They do weigh more than the moon, though. These things are about 5 kilos. So if you're going to make sure you've got a sturdy stand to hold these things up, I actually use a 4-foot camera crane from Pro Aim to hold this thing. It's not on it there, but when I need to get it boomed overhead, directly overhead, I tried various sort of boom arms and things like that, and it just is too heavy, too much of a liability. So it goes on a camera crane. If you're using a flash, obviously, to do that, you don't need anything that robust. Or if you're just using one of the incandescent ones, they weigh nothing. You know, they're a couple of pounds, if that, something like that. Right, and there's one of those. So yeah, so these things weigh nothing. They cost very little.
How do you avoid unwanted shadows or hotspots on a background where you can't bounce off the ceiling or a coloured wall? That was a question that came in quite a while ago, in fact, really. Any advice for them on that?
So we wouldn't be bouncing off the ceiling for this sort of light style. It's quite controlled and, you know, hemmed in. But one of the problems that you do get with this is from the key light, and this is a problem in a small studio. If your background isn't far enough away, then you can get spill from the key light starting to creep up the back wall there. And what I tend to do for that, if I can't solve it with the barn doors on the light, then we use a thing where I use some stuff called cinefoil, which I'm sure a lot of you have come across. It's like baking foil, but it's black and quite thick, matte black. And if you scrunch it up and then flatten it out again, it holds its shape really well. So you can mold it around your light, and you can even put it on the incandescent spotlights if you want. It's fairly, you know, it's fireproof really. So I use that. if you are bouncing the light off the ceiling and you want to keep it off the background, it's really, you could flag it, or it's all about distance, really. If you can get the thing far enough away, obviously it's going to be out of the light. But if you can't do that, then you've got to put something in the way. So that's how I would solve that. It's always different in every scenario. I find that you always end up doing something, and sometimes it just depends on what's to hand, as to which way you do it.
Another one there for a minute. Would you ever use a bare bulb in this style of photography?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I talked earlier about, you need to control the light. I mean, obviously, if I throw up a bare bulb, just an absolutely bare bulb, it is going to produce quite a hard light, as long as it's not a bulb the size of a telly or something. But if it's a regular sized bulb, yeah, you're going to get a hard light off that, but it is going to go everywhere. Now, there's various ways you can influence that. I suppose you can get that bulb really close to your subject, so that your exposure is going to be controlled for that, and that's going to throw the rest of it that's bouncing off walls and things into relative darkness. Or you can flag it with something, you can control it with something. So one of the things I bought recently from Aperture, so that's APUTEUER, is of all things a black reflector dish. And you might think, well, what on earth's the point of that? Well, it controls the spill, so it stops the light going behind the light unit, but it doesn't increase the size of the light because it's black. And it comes with a nice set of flocked barn doors and a grid and a filter holder and all that kind of stuff. So it's quite handy. And I've put that on an SL200 LED light, which is what they call a cob light, which looks like a studio flash head, and it accepts Bowen's softboxes and that kind of thing, but it's LED. And if I put that black reflector on it with those barn doors, it will produce light that looks like a Fresnel. So it'll be controlled, it'll be hard, and you've got barn doors that work with it. You can also put it on a small flash tube, like I've tested it on a Godox AD600, which is a bigger version of the little flash guns that I showed you earlier. It has, you have sort of traditional studio flashes are sort of a horseshoe shape, aren't they? Whereas the one in the AD600 is more of a sort of a, if you imagine if you tied up your flash tube into a knot and shoved it on the front of the light, it looks like that. So it does produce one cohesive ball of light. And again, you can control it with this black reflector, and it produces light that's pretty much the same as the AD200 with those barn doors. So again, you can probably make one of these if you just get a fairly shallow reflector dish and spray it matte black. That would do the same. It's just that this one was about £60, I think, and I thought it's reasonable value for money. Depends on, again, how much. If you're time rich and cash poor, get your spray can out. And if you're cash rich and time poor, go and buy one. That's my rule of thumb for whether I need to buy something or make it. Right. Should we have a look at some pictures then?
That'll be good. What was the black foil called again, please?
So it's called, well, actually, Cinefoil, I think, is a Lee trademark, isn't it? Yeah. But I think the actual generic name is just Black Wrap. You can buy Black Wrap. So you can buy it from Roscoe. Roscoe make it, and also Lee. I think mine is Roscoe. I bought it from a company called Stage Depot, which is also where I get my gels and some other bits and bobs, gaffer tape, that sort of stuff. They sell all of that. In fact, if you want actual stage equipment, like an ETC Source 4 projection light, that's the place to go. They will sell you all that stuff.
I was going to say, once upon a time, it was very important, especially when buying gels and you're using hot lights, halogen lights, or the equivalent of, you had to really buy the gels with a temperature for fire, because if everything gets too close, it either melts or it actually goes up in fire. So yeah, a good tip there about going to stage lighting. There's loads of them actually online. If you're in doubt, you go to Roscoe, because that's what they originally began their life as, and things really, if in doubt. And there's some other brands there as well, a cheaper make for you and things really. But again, make sure the fire retardancy and the melt point is really kind of well with that and things really. Obviously, guys, you've got the photography show only like a month away now. I'm personally not going. I hope you have a great time there. But again, if you're looking at the likes of focusable lights and everything else, I would definitely go and have a look at the likes of the Essential Photography stand, because they have some really great gimmicks. They've got a Fresnel attachment to go onto a speed light and other lights as well with it and things really. They've got a whole range of their own lighting as well, which is focusable and projection. You know, you don't have to spend 2-3 grand to really get an amazing kit in photography lighting anymore. Obviously, studio flash is a totally different thing that we're on about here. But you might have seen Glenn Norwood doing some kind of talk photographies over the past. And Glenn absolutely, you know, shoots the hell out of it. And if you have a look at some of his stuff online with it, you've seen him operate on here before. Again, have a little look at that as well. But you've got a perfect opportunity to go and have a play with some lighting at the photography show, because I'm sure that Essential Photography is going to be there as well. Yeah. Owen, somebody read a book. Is it right that a shoulder to camera is, sorry, I read in a book that right shoulder to camera is female and left shoulder to camera is male.
I didn't know that.
I've never heard that in my life. And I would say if I've got somebody with a very big nose or a lopsided face, which is everybody on the planet, you have to look at their face dimension and where they turn to before you then choose a shoulder, wherever it is. I think if you're kind of reading this stuff, a male domination pose would be a wider strength of shoulder and opening to the light source, whereas a female light source would be pretty much the shoulder turned away from the key light. So it actually brings a shadowing across the bust to give a three-dimensional bust as well. Remember, that's what the key thing is for. Then the head turns towards the front shoulder. So I'm not sure what book you've read on that, but that is the classic style I've just explained to you and things really. So perhaps you've either read it wrong or they wrote it wrong or whatever it is, but everybody is slightly different. And I'd obviously avoid from you kind of just going to that by default. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely agree, Mark. You know, I mean, looking for that sort of three dimensionality to features, especially, you know, busts and, you know, faces and things like that. Yeah, it's
great. Let's bring up some images anyway, can we? There's a question quickly from Anne. I've had a problem with white balance. How do you set it for each different light? Do you need to know the temperature for each light?
I wouldn't do it by numbers. I would just do it by eye, to be honest. But one of the things that you do need to be aware of if you're using incandescent spotlights is that when you turn the output down, the light does get warmer. In fact, if you turn it right down, they are orange. It's like looking into an electric fire. They're actually orange. Luckily, because they're 650 watts is not a vast amount of power, you're normally working with all of these lights turned all the way up, to be honest. So that's not normally an issue. Obviously, if you're just working with the raw file, then there is no white balance. You know, you can choose that later. You know, people sometimes say, oh, you can fix the white balance in post. Well, you're not really fixing it. You're just choosing it. Obviously, your camera embeds one in the metadata. And if you open the raw data, the raw file in an image viewer or in Lightroom or something like that, it will read that EXIF, that metadata, and apply those values. But you can choose other values. You know, that's just what it chooses by default. So I don't really sweat the white balance setting on the camera too much. It is nice to be able to see a preview of what you're going to get when in the finished image on the back of the camera. That just gives you the confidence. So, you know, I will probably try and set it to somewhere around probably about 4,000 Kelvin, something like that, which is between, it's still warm, but it's not sort of daylight, you know. So these lights are about 3,200 Kelvin, maybe even less than that, maybe down to 3,000, maybe even less. And I still want that warm look, you know, that's part of it really. But I'd probably set it around somewhere around 4,000 to 4,500, something like that, just as a preview. But later on, I'm probably going to choose something else. And here's the thing, right? I'll sometimes produce these images in color, but later on, as part of the black and white conversion, the white balance is one of the things I'm going to mess with. And if you were to put the image back into color, it would look horrendous, right? But of course, it's just all about changing the relative brightness values on the skin and the clothes and the lips and things like that. In fact, some of the time recently, I've been experimenting with what I'm now calling Melbourne style black and white conversions, because Peter Coulson does it this way in his studio in Melbourne. And that is, he just puts the contrast to 100%, the shadows to 100%, and the blacks to 100%, and then controls everything on the exposure and the highlights. And it gives you a very different mix. Doesn't always work. Sometimes it looks horrendous. But for a lot of probably more softer light pictures, like he tends to shoot on his big white sweep in his studio, it is very effective. So there's lots of ways of doing black and white conversions, and of course, it doesn't necessarily need to translate back into color. But just while you were
just on the color balance for 1 minute, sorry, the only thing I would say is if you're being very creative with CTO, and let's say you're doing a double CTO, you'll find it very restrictive. If you don't custom balance on camera, when you have a double CTO color, it's almost impossible to get back to a CTO coloring. So yeah. You should really then custom balance on camera if you're getting really creative with color balance. I'm talking now as a commercial photographer, as far as the light's concerned. So just be aware that if you're doubling up or going beyond 1.5 CTOs, you should really try and control it in camera, because otherwise in post-production you're going to struggle to get that true color back. Sorry, Owen, yours. You're muted. Oh, you're back.
It's a very good point, you know, and there are some.
Sorry, a CTO is color temperature orange, the color of tungsten. Okay, color tungsten orange. That's what it means. So CTO. Sorry, go ahead, Owen.
I was just saying, if you're unlucky enough to own a Godox QT Mark II light, when you turn them down, they're so far off the blue end that you can't get it back in post either. So you have to do custom white balance. But just don't buy those. Obviously, they don't make them anymore. They're on the Mark III now. I was just going to say, what are images? Is that this is the Roscoe gel catalog, and there are all kinds of things in here. But they also make these. This is super gel. So if you are going to use hot lights, these are thinner. So there's more of the energy passes through them. They don't make all of them, as you can see. It's a subset, but if you're going to use hot lights, get these.
And the sample pack is great if you want a cheap way to add them to your speed lights as well, guys. I never said that out loud, okay? But you can strip them down and you can stick them on, okay? But I never said that out loud. Don't get them too close to the flash, of course. Otherwise, you know what's going to do? It's going to melt on your flash, and it's then going to be a colored flash.
That's right.
I've done it.
Yeah. I mean, I do put gels in contact with my glass domes on my studio lights, because I can clean those with acetone, but you can't bring acetone anywhere near an 8200 or a flash gun, because it'll melt the front of the flash gun as well.
Okay.
Right. Let's look at some images. So this is what I would say is the sort of standard shot, right? This is the reference image. This is the kind of thing that you would have seen back in the day. Let's just make this bigger. And what we've got here is the key light is centered above the model, and it's quite high up, as we can see by the sort of depth of the nose shadow there. And it's on full flood. It's really hard. We can see a nice crisp edge to these shadows. We've got really well-defined eyelash shadows. And I'm using the barn doors to sort of constrict it to the central portion of the face there. In fact, you can see that more. It's more evident just down the hand there. You can see that this bit has fallen into shadow. Now I've got quite a bit of fill light, as you can see just under the chin there. Even though that light is not impacting this area, it's not dark. It's a little bit darker towards the back where the fill light isn't reaching, because it's not a true fill light. It's not coming from the camera position. It's actually that white reflector board which is underneath there. We're shooting at probably, I think I tend to use an 85mm, an old 85mm lens, Nikon AFD 85mm, circa 1986 or thereabouts. One of the early sort of autofocus lenses. Not for any particular reason. But it does produce some strange artifacts on the highlights. It's uncoated or relatively uncoated, and does produce some sort of chromatic aberration, spherochromatism. But I quite like that. Right, for this style of image, it does produce some nice sort of sparkly bits. These little sparkles that you can see on here, though, are fictitious. I've added those in post with a brush in Photoshop. There's lots of different plugins you can use. You can use filters on your lens to do that. You can get like 4-point cross filters that you can use, or bits of gauze or stuff like that. But I tend to do that sort of thing in post. And this is just a bit of cheap costume jewelry. It came from eBay, I think, or maybe even Wish. And Nicole will kill me for saying that. She's trying to wean me off buying stuff off Wish. The other thing to mention, so Melanie Doyle did the makeup for this. If you've come across Mel, she's a legend in the makeup world. She used to run a makeup academy in Warrington. She now works full-time for commercial productions, TV, film, that kind of thing. But she did the hair and makeup. And we've got quite a few, sort of wispy hairs here. And again, this is something that I quite like with this backlight. If you had sort of Lego hair, you wouldn't get this sort of edge, this sort of glow to it. So a few little flyaways are good. If you've got one that's sticking out that looks a bit extra, then obviously you can take that out in post if you forgot to sort of flatten it down on set. Other things to mention, we've got the slash of light here on the background, which is just another Fresnel spotlight with the barn doors. But in this case, I've zoomed the light in so that it's more of an oval. It's really, we're not getting an edge from the barn door on this. It's just more of a sort of a gradation towards the middle. Now, again, you can do this stuff in post. And I have done this on occasion where I've not liked the background or I've forgotten to do it. You can do this stuff pretty easily in Photoshop these days. It will automatically select subjects and stuff like that. But I kind of feel for this sort of image, because I'm trying to sort of recreate something vintage, that I should really try and get it to work on set. In terms of pose, here I've just got our model here, Rain Swan, this is. Just to look directly into the lens. She's got her chin just slightly raised into the light, and we'll finesse the height of that key light to get it to look good on the face, while still giving us the drama and the shadows below. It's quite important for the model to be reasonably still with this sort of style. It is, I'm not going to lie, it's quite difficult. It's quite hard on the model to make this work. In terms of the hand, we've got the sort of thin edge towards camera, and we've got to get the model to sort of position that quite far back in the frame. We don't want it to be bigger than her head, or to look bigger than her head. And one of the things I tend to do for this sort of thing, to try and make it look natural, is to just have them just move the hand around rather than sort of micro direct it and say, can you raise your third finger slightly or do this or whatever. It starts to just get like a game of Twister. And gets out of hand and looks really false. So I'll just ask them to just sort of move, just keep moving slightly, moving their hand up and down, back and forth, and just changing their expression, moving their chin up and down, and I'll just continually be taking pictures. The lens is almost wide open for most of these things. This lens is an f1.0 over 1.8, and I'll shoot it at that, or maybe f2, something like that. So I've got to watch the focus on the eye, got to make sure and check that that's still in focus as they're moving around, and that depth of field is quite low at that point. So, it's quite critical that you keep your focus going. I disabled the autofocus on my shutter button many years ago, and I recommend that you all do that. And I just use the dedicated AF button on the back of the camera to do that. And I just position the cursor on the eye and press that occasionally if I think the model's moved a little bit. And then also important, check on the back of the camera, zoom in and have a look and make sure that you're not messing it up. As I have done this in the past, but somehow I've disabled the autofocus entirely and just kidding myself that the thing was focusing, and it hasn't been. But as long as you check, hopefully you've not wasted too many frames by the time you pick that up. Right, let's move on. It does translate into other settings. So after we've done this portrait, we got Rain to just stand against one of the corners in the studio, and we've got the edge light here is actually in the frame, and I haven't. We did this on set with a crystal. So I've just held a crystal in front of the lens, just in front of the light, which is just here, and it has scattered the light and obscured that light, and it just looks like it's not there. It's just been split into some nice little artifacts in the back. So that we've actually got that edge light here. We've got the key light again, just up above. And this is something, the way I like to think about this is, if you imagine the light looking good in a portrait scenario where they're sitting formally in front of a camera like they were earlier, you know, on a stool. If you're going to do it somewhere else and they're going to be lying down or sitting or kneeling or whatever it is, just think that you're going to transpose the whole thing. So if you imagine the model and the light locked together in position, if the model tilts back, you need to tilt the light with it, so that it's still coming from roughly the same direction. Obviously within reason, you know, you don't have to be a slave to it, but I find as long as the direction of the light is pretty much the same, you're going to get the same sort of look that we're after. I think you can see quite readily on this one that the light is coming pretty much flat onto her face there by the very shallow nose shadow under there, which has produced some very dramatic eyes actually. So a slightly different look, but one which I think really works. Also translates into color, full length, even for nude shots and things like that. This is again in the small studio on the back wall this time, and there are two lights in play here. There's one overhead. Again, it's a Fresnel focused spotlight. It is zoomed in so that the edges are soft, with the barn doors now creating this sort of oval on the backdrop. The second light is a fill. I've just got another one of those spotlights just aimed into a 1.5 by 2 meter panel, which is, I think it was a bit of cardboard I got off a bit of furniture, and I just painted it with white emulsion. But any white surface will do, or a big softbox, that will also do the job. Anything that's just you know, nice and big that you can get in close. But that's what we had to hand at the time. Because we've just finished doing some portraits, so we just recycled that light. They were already on the stands, so they were to hand, and I just aimed it into a big board just to provide some fill. Now, I don't have a studio made of stone, so this wall is in Rome, and I highly encourage you to do that. If you know, obviously you can buy these things, these packs of textures, but I like to create my own. You get some funny looks taking pictures of blank walls in cities, but I just find this just a nice thing to do. I've been using this one for years. But to apply it in Photoshop, again, it's really, really easy. You just put this on a new layer. You use the auto select feature to select the subject, and then you use that to mask this layer, the wall layer, the texture layer, off the model. So this layer goes on top of the picture that you took in the studio. Set the blend mode to overlay or soft light, or one of those blend modes. So you've got things like multiply, screen, soft light, hard light, and overlay, but generally you're going for overlay. And then dial down the opacity to taste, and it will retain the studio shadows. Right? So it's going to interact with the light that's already there. And I find that this just lifts pictures, you know, to a slightly different level versus just a plain grey wall. And obviously it works in color, and I've had Nicole raise her face right up to the light there so that it's we don't get any strange scrappy shadows. This was a commercial shoot for a boutique clothing company called Vivara. This is the designer. She also models. In fact, she made this dress specifically to show off these bras that she'd made, which she'd embroidered with these Swarovski crystals. So she made more or less everything in this shot, apart from this thing, which came out of my bling bag. But this shot is lit with 8200s. This is lit with the flash. But I think, as you can see, we're getting a very similar quality of light. We've got a nice hard light. And I think I had the tube on it. And I may have put some diffusion over it to try and control the sort of specular highlights. But to be honest, I don't think it really makes much difference. It's one of the things that's worth mentioning, actually, because this is one of the things that I see erroneously declared across the internet. Just adding diffusion to a light is not going to make it soft, unless it also makes it bigger, right? So putting a tiny bit of diffusion, which is the same size as the light, on the front of a speed light or something, it's maybe going to smooth out some of your highlights, but it's not going to change the shadow quality at all. It's not going to make it softer. It may reduce the light output a little bit, which I think some people then mistake for softer light because it's less contrasty with the fill light. But anyway, we use the flash for this. In the back, we've got 2 flashes either side for the edge lights, just in the same way as we saw with the tungsten. And I've also got a third one directly behind the model. And its job is to light up this fog, which is just from a 50 quid, 1 kilowatt fog machine, which I really like the fog. In fact, I've done workshops just on fog. And I use it quite a lot in my shots, either as haze to just add general atmosphere, produce volumetric shafts of light, which I also am addicted to, or just in this case, just to add some sort of background, which is just a little bit more interesting than a black background. Right, let's go through these because this shows the process from start to finish. This is as shot. So people sometimes call this straight out of camera, which is a strange thing to say, I think, because it's just processed with a different set of values, which again, you can change in Lightroom or Capture One or whatever it is that you're doing your conversions with or doing your processing with. I will do in Lightroom, I do most of the heavy lifting on the exposure and the color with the raw file, right? Because I've got the maximum amount of data available there. Does it make that much of a difference versus a 16-bit TIFF? Possibly not. That's still quite a wide sort of color gamut, but it's just something that I do. I wouldn't get too held up on that though, because I do tend to do a little bit more color processing later after it's come back from Photoshop. So this is after I've processed it in Lightroom to get the color, the first stab at the color that I want, and the tone. So I've controlled the highlights a little bit. Typically I'm turning the highlights down, turning the shadows up slightly, and then maybe setting the black and white points to the whites just going off. And maybe with the black, I'm just going to do that by eye, because sometimes I do go for blacks that are not quite black in these sort of images, but I like to try and maximize that dynamic range across the scene. Oh, going the wrong way. Right, Photoshop work. Then I'm smoothing the skin. I use a number of techniques to do this. It's all manual. There are plugins that you can get to do this. But essentially I'm removing any sort of singular blemishes, like the sort of wrinkles on the elbows, for example, maybe the wrinkles under the eyes, any sort of creases or anything like that. Oh, creases under the neck, for example. Everybody's got these things, you know, and this is something that people do sometimes get hung up on, you know, what's sort of morally right to do in this case. I would say for me, if we're producing a glamour portrait, the whole thing is aimed at making you look as good as possible. So the lighting, the photography, and the post-production, the makeup is all aimed at making you look better than you normally are. So I don't really get hung up on removing, things and making things look as optimized as I can for this style of photography anyway. You'll also see that I've changed the lip color. I quite often do this. Models quite often, if they're doing their own makeup, they're not going to have the range of colors that a makeup artist will be able to give you. And for this sort of style, I like a deep red. So in this case, we have more of a pink, and I've just changed that in Photoshop. The way that I do this is to just roughly select the lips, put them on a new layer. I then change the blend mode to multiply, which is very dark, and then I mask that out and then brush it back in with an almost hard brush around the edges of the lip. I'll go around the inside edge and then around the outside edge. And once I've got that dialed in, so it's just on the lip with that mask, then I clip a hue and saturation layer to that layer, so you create a clipping mask, and then we can play with the colors and the hue and that kind of thing. I'll then use the blend if sliders to usually get the effect off the highlights progressively, which makes it look completely natural then. Sometimes if you just apply it, just a color change across the board, it looks a bit fake. So use those blend if sliders. The joys of the blend if sliders, I could wax lyrical about that for ages. I use those on so many things. Usually put a bit of red in the cheeks as well, and maybe change take a bit of yellow out of the teeth perhaps, and maybe brighten them slightly. The next stage in skin treatment is that I set up a frequency separation construct. I won't go into the maths or any of that now, mainly because I can't remember it. But if you just Google it, you'll find loads and loads of stuff on this. But essentially, its job is to separate the texture from the more broad tones and color, because I'm almost exclusively messing with those broad tones and colors, and I don't want to destroy the skin texture in the process. Not the fine texture anyway. As you can see, it's quite smooth after I've finished, but if you were to zoom in, you would still see micro hairs and skin pores and things like that. People quite often wonder about, or criticize frequency separation and say it does terrible things to skin. Frequency separation does nothing at all to your image. If your image looks different after you've set frequency separation up, you've done it wrong. You're still going to use things like blur, brush, that kind of thing within that construct, but what it's going to do is protect those textures. All right, so you're just going to mess on the low frequency layer. So typically on the low frequency layer, I'm then applying some Gaussian blur at small values, but I apply it lots of times. And the difference between doing that and applying it in one big go is that it's not producing a flat result, but it is progressively mixing those things locally together. I also sometimes use the mixer brush, which is like applying a wet paintbrush to a watercolor. I don't have any paint on it, so it doesn't add any color or anything like that, but what it does do is blend the colors as you're brushing. I use a little Wacom tablet to do this. It's quite intuitive doing it that way, to sort of mix things together more locally. You can actually change the shapes of things and affect things by pushing tones and colors about with the mixer brush, which I really like. So there's an element of painting goes into some of these just to sort of get that final result. You'll also see sort of harsh specular highlights on the skin here, like on the end of the nose and that kind of thing. You can deal with that with makeup to an extent, but again, I don't really sweat it because I know that I can just spread that out in that frequency layer construct with a bit of Gaussian blur, and you just keep doing that locally until it's sort of flattened out. Finally, back in Lightroom, I'm then going to also do the black and white conversion. And the aim of the game here really is you're only left with tone now, you've got no color, but you've got all those color channels to play with. Now you can go and look at profiles in Lightroom, and you've got things like the green channel and the blue channel all the way up to the red channel, which makes the skin look brightest. Sometimes I have a bit of success with the green channel and the blue channel in this style, but generally speaking, I just leave it as straight monochrome for the profile, and then I'm going to be just messing with the white point, the brightness, and the shadows. There's also a curve in Lightroom But it does pretty much the same thing as those sliders, right? It's manipulating the same regions of the histogram. You may get a different result, a slightly more gradated result using the curve, but really they do the same job. You can do it per color channel though in the curve, which is something you can't do with the sliders. I'm usually brightening the eyes, actually, is something we didn't talk about. Yeah, I think I've brightened the eyes slightly on this one. You'll also see a few little shape changes. So, you know, where clothes are pinched in and produced, you know, little bulges, then we can push those in with the forward warp tool in Liquify. Be very careful with that tool, right? You can easily go too far with that, but just make the brush about the same size as the curve you're going to manipulate. So on these ones, I'm going to pull out these little creases here and then push the whole thing back in. So I'll pull that little crease out and then push the whole thing back in. And the aim of the game is to produce that, you know, more cohesive shape that we want. But don't go wild with it. You know, if you change the shape of somebody's face, they'll recognize it straight away.
Yeah, loving all the comments coming through. I've been answering them like bananas actually on the keyboard here anyway, because I knew we'd run out of time. Guys, absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much, Owen, for your time. Let me just bring back the presentation to me, if that's okay. And then
Yep. Time's run away, but I didn't even realize. So.
That's okay, don't worry. It was loads of questions at the beginning and it was kind of going through everything. There's a couple little things that I found anyway to do with Fresnel. So basically, if you want some information on frequency separation, remember Deborah Selwood has done all that on the Academy for us. So if you want an in-depth tutorial with her, then that's a good thing to look at. I would say look at the likes of the, whether you're a Godox fan or not, but the little Fresnel fitting on your lens is really good on that. There's the 300 watt daylight balanced LED. I'm not sure if you've had any experience to these at all. Have you?
I'd say it's a little bit weak at 30 watts.
Weak is the trouble, and you have to be so close with it, isn't it? Is the kind of element with it. But you know, if you need some lighting on the cheap and you don't mind to cook the client, there's the redheads, and you'll basically get a 2 or a 3-headed redhead kit for about £100 on Amazon and the likes of. And if you search others, you'll get loads of things. But you know, the common denominator is Fresnel or a focused light. You spell it F-R-E-S-N-E-L, Fresnel, yeah? But it'll focus in. There's some very expensive LED lights, some very expensive tungsten lights, and some very expensive flash with it as well. So if you can kind of look at the adapters, that will really help you as well. There's another little bit of a tip. When Owen was showing you about a snoot made from card, once you've found the kind of thing that you like, if you've got an old enlarger lens, I don't mean the lens that goes in, but the actual lens on the inside, they're domed, yes? You can even have some of the old Hoya or Chromatech filter, like they're a close-up lens. You can actually make slots in the top of your snoot. And if you kind of find you can do that, you can actually use that as a fake focus as well with it. If you've got two, you can invert them and move them separate across. It's kind of all the DIY things. Once upon a time, this stuff didn't exist unless you had a lot of money. So in studios, we used to make all our own projection boxes and everything else with it. Things really. So if you like the DIY, like you were showing, Owen, there's some extra tips beyond that. To kind of really have a little look as well with it and things really. But yeah, brilliant. The amount of comments that we've had coming through, and we've seen them all stick as well, because as a rule they're gone on the hour, and it's Valentine's Day, so I'm not going to let them hang on anymore. Otherwise, they're going to be getting nagged by their partners of either sex, as it were. Thank you, Owen. It's been a great session, and I promise to all those who are asking about the workshops, I'll make sure that we put those live on the Academy Facebook page whenever Owen lets us know there's going to be some going on. But thank you, Owen, for a brilliant night.
Thank you very much, Mark. It's been a pleasure. And I see you've got David Lund next, who's absolutely fantastic. Kept me busy during lockdown, emulating some of his stuff. So
very, very good. Thanks, Owen. Thanks, everybody, for joining us live. See you all soon. Take care now.